The emptiness that engulfs us is not a void to be feared, but perhaps the only truth we can ever know. On a rain-soaked evening in Frankfurt in 1859, a solitary figure sat by the window of his modest apartment, watching droplets trace chaotic patterns down the glass. This man, whose penetrating gaze had become legendary among those few who dared engage with him, was completing what would be the final revision of his life's work. Arthur Schopenhauer, now in his 71st year, had long ago resigned himself to the indifference of the world. Yet in that very resignation lay his most profound insight, that to truly see reality is to recognize its fundamental emptiness, the paradox of existence. What if everything you desire is precisely what causes your suffering? What if the very structure of existence guarantees disappointment? These questions, so disturbing to contemplate, formed the core of Schopenhauer's philosophy, a philosophy that begins not with abstract speculation, but with the raw fact of our lived experience. The World as Will and Representation, he wrote in his masterwork, published 40 years earlier to almost complete public indifference. Now as death approached, these words were finally beginning to resonate with a new generation of thinkers. His thesis was as simple as it was devastating. Behind the veil of appearances lies an insatiable cosmic will, blind and purposeless, manifesting itself through our individual desires that can never be truly satisfied. Consider the businessman who sacrifices everything, health, relationships, peace of mind, to accumulate wealth, only to find that each achievement merely spawns new desires. Or the lover who pursues their beloved with mad intensity, believing fulfillment awaits in union, only to discover boredom or disappointment once the chase ends. Schopenhauer would merely nod, unsurprised. Life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom, he observed with characteristic bluntness. The illusion of satisfaction: you wake up and check your phone before your eyes have fully adjusted to the light, you browse social media, feeling a mixture of envy and validation, you work tirelessly for a promotion that once achieved, quickly becomes your new normal, you pursue romantic partnerships with fervor, believing they will complete you, only to find yourself unchanged in your essence. Does this sound familiar? Schopenhauer would identify this as the cycle of willing and temporary satisfaction, followed inevitably by new willing. What appears as progress is merely motion, the hamster wheel of desire spins faster, but goes nowhere. This insight came to him not through abstract theorizing, but through keen observation of human behavior and deep introspection. Born in 1788 to a wealthy merchant family in Danzig, now Gdansk, Poland, Arthur's early life was marked by privilege and trauma in equal measure. His father, Heinrich Floris Schopenhauer, was an austere, proud man with republican sentiments, who likely died by suicide when Arthur was 17. His mother, Johanna, was a socialite and novelist who established a popular salon in Weimar after her husband's death, a salon that attracted luminaries like Goethe, but had no place for her brooding, difficult son. "My life has been a series of sufferings," Schopenhauer once confided to a rare friend, "and I've come to understand that this is no accident, but the very nature of existence." This was not mere personal complaint, but the seed of a philosophical system that would challenge the optimistic rationalism dominating European thought. The young Schopenhauer initially followed his father's wishes by training for a mercantile career, but after Heinrich's death, he abandoned commerce for classical studies and philosophy. By 1819, he had completed The World as Will and Representation, the work that would eventually establish him as one of the most influential thinkers of the 19th century, though not before decades of neglect. Introspection through philosophy: the genius of Schopenhauer lies in his fusion of Western philosophical tradition with Eastern wisdom. While Kant had argued that we can never know the thing in itself, the ultimate reality behind appearances, Schopenhauer made a daring leap: we can know the thing in itself through direct introspection, because we ourselves are manifestations of it. And what do we find when we look within? Not the rational soul proposed by Plato, or the moral law celebrated by Kant, but blind, restless will. Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills, Schopenhauer wrote, capturing the paradox of human freedom. We experience ourselves as choosing freely, yet do not choose the desires that drive those choices. This insight anticipates Freud's concept of the unconscious by nearly a century, and resonates with contemporary neuroscience's challenges to simplistic notions of free will. Unlike his contemporaries who celebrated human reason, Schopenhauer saw intellect as merely a servant of will, evolved to help us satisfy our desires, not to reveal truth. When we believe we are making rational decisions, we are often merely rationalizing what our will has already determined. The businessman decides to pursue wealth because the will to life expresses itself through him as ambition. The lover chooses their beloved because unconscious forces of reproduction drive them. This pessimistic assessment earned Schopenhauer few admirers in his lifetime. Germany in the early 19th century was enthralled by Hegel's vision of history as the progressive self-realization of spirit, a view Schopenhauer dismissed as empty verbiage and absolute nonsense. While Hegel lectured to packed halls at the University of Berlin, Schopenhauer, teaching at the same institution, found himself addressing nearly empty rooms. Embittered but undeterred, he eventually retired to Frankfurt, where he lived alone with his poodles, writing and refining his philosophy in obscurity. The isolation that might have broken another thinker became for Schopenhauer confirmation of his worldview. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, he wrote, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free. His voluntary withdrawal from society was not mere misanthropy, but a philosophical stance, a rejection of the endless striving for status and recognition that he saw as manifestations of the insatiable will. The psychology of suffering, what Schopenhauer intuited through philosophical contemplation, modern psychology has confirmed through empirical research. The hedonic treadmill, our tendency to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness, despite major positive or negative life changes, is precisely the cycle of desire, temporary satisfaction, and new desire that Schopenhauer described nearly 2 centuries ago. Consider the research on lottery winners. Studies have found that after an initial period of elation, their happiness levels generally return to pre-winning baselines. The new mansion, the luxury car, the exotic vacations, all quickly become normalized, ceasing to provide the anticipated joy. This is the will at work, never satisfied, always generating new desires once old ones are fulfilled. Schopenhauer would not have been surprised by our modern epidemic of depression and anxiety, particularly among the materially privileged. Wealth is like seawater, he observed. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. Our consumerist society, with its endless parade of products promising fulfillment, is the will's playground, a system perfectly designed to keep us perpetually dissatisfied while believing that satisfaction lies just one purchase away. The psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, building on Freud but influenced by Schopenhauer, identified this as the structure of desire itself, not simply wanting particular objects, but wanting to want, a perpetual motion machine of longing that can never be stilled by any specific acquisition or achievement. What we truly desire, Lacan suggested, is not the object of desire, but the state of desiring itself. Neuroscientific research on the brain's reward system provides a biological basis for these philosophical insights. Dopamine, often mischaracterized as simply a pleasure chemical, is more accurately understood as mediating anticipation and motivation, the urge to pursue rewards rather than the satisfaction of obtaining them. Evolution has designed us not for contentment, but for striving. Schopenhauer's pessimism thus finds confirmation in our very neurochemistry. We are, as he insisted, manifestations of a blind will to life that uses the mirage of satisfaction to keep us pursuing its aims, primarily survival and reproduction, with no concern for our individual happiness. The mirror of loneliness. If Jung proposed a path of integration and healing, Schopenhauer ruthlessly revealed a harder truth. Loneliness is not a psychological condition to be overcome, but a mirror reflecting the fundamental nature of existence. He did not offer consolation but clarity. Desire, he stated plainly, is the root of suffering. Suffering is the essence of life. Schopenhauer saw loneliness as inevitable precisely because the principium individuationis, the principle of individuation that creates the illusion of separate selves, is ultimately an illusion generated by the forms of our perception, space and time. At the deepest level, we are all manifestations of the same blind will, yet paradoxically, this metaphysical unity cannot be experienced directly in the world of representation where we live our daily lives. We crave love, recognition, approval, but these are all forms of desire, and each leads either to disappointment when unfulfilled, or to boredom when satisfied. The pendulum swings between pain and emptiness, with no possibility of escape within the normal operations of consciousness. This uncompromising vision makes Schopenhauer the philosopher of choice for life's darkest moments, when platitudes fail and optimistic systems seem like cruel jokes. His work found its first serious audience among artists and writers, rather than academic philosophers. Richard Wagner, Leo Tolstoy, Thomas Hardy, and Friedrich Nietzsche all acknowledged profound debts to his thought. These creative minds recognized in Schopenhauer's unvarnished truth a kind of liberation. If happiness through fulfillment of desire is impossible by definition, then perhaps we should seek a different path entirely. Is another view possible? Having led us to the edge of the abyss, Schopenhauer does not abandon us there. Yes, life is suffering. Yes, desire is endless. Yes, individual existence is isolation. But is this the complete picture? Is there no escape from the wheel of misery? Here, Schopenhauer makes his most surprising move. The very intellect that normally serves the will can, under special circumstances, break free from its master. In aesthetic contemplation, the disinterested appreciation of beauty, we momentarily cease to be subject to the will's demands. When we lose ourselves in a painting, a symphony, or a sublime natural landscape, the endless wanting stops. We become pure, will-less, painless, timeless subject of knowledge. This aesthetic liberation is temporary, but it points toward a more radical possibility, the complete denial of the will to life. Schopenhauer, the Western philosopher most deeply influenced by Eastern thought, saw in ascetic practices not mere self-denial, but the path to freedom. By systematically refusing the will's demands, through celibacy, voluntary poverty, and the surrender of ego, rare individuals could achieve what he called the quieting of the will. Nothing can distress or encumber you, he wrote of this state, because you have cast all your burden on nothingness, and live in the weightless realm of forms. Here we encounter the most radical dimension of Schopenhauer's thought, his essentially mystical vision of liberation through self-negation. This is not suicide, which he explicitly rejected as an affirmation, rather than denial of will, but a gradual weakening of will's hold, through recognition of the fundamental unity of all beings, and the illusory nature of individuation. In Compassion Mitleid, literally suffering with, Schopenhauer found the ethical manifestation of this metaphysical insight. When we truly recognize that the suffering of others is ontologically indistinguishable from our own, that the boundary between self and other is a formal illusion, compassionate action follows naturally. The saint and the truly ethical person act not from abstract principle, but from direct intuition of being's unity. The asceticism of soul. Schopenhauer taught what might be called an asceticism of soul, not to fight for recognition, not to cling to pleasures, but to learn to be without striving to be someone. And this is the most difficult path, because it requires not action from you, but letting go. In a culture obsessed with self-improvement, self-expression, and self-actualization, Schopenhauer's vision of salvation through self-negation appears alien. We are told from all sides to pursue our desires, to follow our bliss, to accumulate experiences and achievements. Schopenhauer stands as a solitary voice asking, what if all this striving is precisely the problem? The Buddhist concept of anatta no-self resonates profoundly with Schopenhauer's insights. Both suggest that our identification with a separate, autonomous self is the root of suffering, and both propose liberation through recognition of this self's illusory nature. Schopenhauer's philosophy thus serves as a bridge between Eastern wisdom traditions and Western metaphysics, anticipating the cross-cultural dialogues that would flourish in the 20th century. Consider how revolutionary this perspective was in 19th century Europe. While Hegel was celebrating the march of spirit through history, and the emerging industrial capitalism was intensifying individualistic competition, Schopenhauer was quietly suggesting that the entire project of self-advancement was fundamentally misguided, a chasing after wind, as Ecclesiastes, a biblical text he greatly admired, puts it. But Schopenhauer's asceticism is not life-denying in a simplistic sense, rather it denies the conventional understanding of life as individual striving, and instead opens toward a more expansive conception, what he called better consciousness, besseres Bewusstsein. This is not another world beyond this one, but a different way of experiencing this world, freed from the distorting lens of personal desire. The transformation of perspective. How might we apply Schopenhauer's insights today? Without retreating to monasteries or mountain caves, perhaps the transformation begins with attention, with noticing the endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction as it operates in our lives. The executive who achieves his target, only to find the goalposts immediately moved. The social media user refreshing her feed for another hit of validation, the consumer experiencing buyer's remorse, even as they eye their next purchase. All are caught in the web of will that Schopenhauer described. Simply recognizing this pattern can create a small space of freedom. Mindfulness practices, which have gained mainstream acceptance in recent decades, offer a practical method for cultivating the will-less knowing that Schopenhauer identified in aesthetic experience. By observing our thoughts and sensations without immediate identification or reaction, we can develop what he might have called contemplative distance from the will's demands. Paradoxically, this withdrawal from the fever of wanting often leads to greater satisfaction than the direct pursuit of happiness. Studies on mindfulness and well-being confirm what Schopenhauer intuited. Those who can step back from the stream of desires tend to report greater life satisfaction than those constantly chasing the next goal or acquisition. This is not to suggest that Schopenhauer offers a path to perpetual bliss. His vision remains fundamentally tragic. The will can be temporarily suspended or gradually quieted, but never eliminated. While life persists, we cannot escape suffering entirely, but we can perhaps achieve what the Greeks called ataraxia, a tranquility that comes not from getting what we want, but from limiting our wants. The two enemies of human happiness are pain and boredom, Schopenhauer wrote. By developing the capacity to be present without constant stimulation, addressing boredom, and to accept rather than resist life's inevitable disappointments, addressing pain, we move toward the quieting of will he envisioned. The void is freedom. As we confront the emptiness that Schopenhauer placed at existence core, an unexpected possibility emerges. What if this void, rather than a cause for despair, is actually the space of freedom? What if emptiness is not a lack but an opening? The nothingness that awaits at the end of desire's exhaustion is not, in Schopenhauer's vision, mere negation, but a kind of clearing, a space where something new can appear. When we cease defining ourselves by our wants and achievements, we discover a form of being that exists prior to all striving. This is what Eastern traditions call our original face, the self before self-consciousness, before the will's elaborate disguises. A man can be himself only so long as he, Schopenhauer wrote, celebrating solitude, not as isolation, but as the condition for authenticity. In our hyperconnected age, where validation from others is constantly sought and instantly delivered, this insight becomes even more radical. To withdraw from the stream of external confirmation is to create the possibility of encountering oneself, not as a social construction, but as a manifestation of being itself. This does not mean that human connection is to be avoided. Schopenhauer himself, despite his reputation for misanthropy, maintained meaningful correspondences and intellectual exchanges throughout his life. Rather, it suggests that genuine connection becomes possible only when we stop using others as mirrors for our ego or instruments for our desires. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh expresses a similar insight with his concept of interbeing, the recognition that what we call self is actually composed entirely of non-self elements. This apparent paradox captures precisely what Schopenhauer was driving at with his distinction between the world, as will, the underlying unity of being, and as representation, the illusory world of separate objects and individuals. Modern physics, with its dissolution of solid matter into probability waves and fields of force, offers a scientific parallel to this metaphysical insight. The seemingly solid self, like apparently solid matter, dissolves under close examination into relationships and processes,
not things but happenings. Schopenhauer's intuition of the world's fundamental unity, dismissed as mysticism by his contemporaries, finds unexpected confirmation in quantum entanglement and field theories. The endless horizon, as dawn broke over Frankfurt, on that September morning in 1860, Arthur Schopenhauer rose as usual at 5 o'clock, made his coffee, and sat down to write. By noon he had completed his day's work, and was preparing for his customary afternoon walk, when he felt a sudden shortness of breath. He died later that day, peacefully in his armchair. Found among his papers was a final note that serves as a fitting epitaph for this most honest of philosophers. Life is a business that does not cover its costs. Yet alongside this characteristic pessimism was evidence of a life not without its satisfactions, careful annotations in 6 languages, correspondence with admirers who had finally discovered his work, and notes for future projects that would remain unrealized. Schopenhauer's vision of emptiness as truth offers no false consolation, no promise that everything happens for a reason, no guarantee of ultimate redemption. What it offers instead is clarity, a clear-eyed assessment of existence that paradoxically can lead to a kind of peace. When we stop expecting fulfillment from that which cannot provide it, we open ourselves to experiences of beauty, compassion, and tranquility that, while temporary, offer genuine respite from desire's endless demands. If there is hope in Schopenhauer, it lies not in escape from the human condition, but in facing it honestly, and discovering, in that very honesty, moments of freedom. The will cannot be defeated, but it can perhaps be seen through, and in that seeing, temporarily suspended. As we navigate our desire-saturated culture, with its promises of fulfillment through consumption, achievement, and acclaim, Schopenhauer stands as a necessary counterweight, the philosopher who dares to suggest that what we want may not be what we need, and that the path to peace may lead through the very emptiness we most fear. The ultimate paradox of Schopenhauer's philosophy is that by abandoning hope for happiness, as conventionally understood, we create the conditions for a deeper contentment. By accepting the void at existence's heart, we free ourselves from the exhausting effort to fill it with things that cannot satisfy. In emptiness, strangely, we may find fullness. In the surrender of desire, the peace that desire promises, but never delivers. As you close this chapter and continue with your day, perhaps checking notifications, planning purchases, pursuing goals, consider carrying with you a grain of Schopenhauer's insight. Notice the wanting mind, the believing in better circumstances mind, the if-only mind. Notice without judgment, with the compassionate clarity, that Schopenhauer, beneath his notorious pessimism, ultimately embodied. For in that noticing lies the seed of freedom, not from life's unavoidable pains, but from the second arrow of resistance that compounds suffering. The emptiness that Schopenhauer identified is not a nullity, but a vast openness, frightening perhaps, but also liberating. Like the endless horizon over the ocean he once sailed as a young man, it extends beyond all our mental constructions, all our strategies of control, all our futile attempts to make permanent what is by nature transient. And in that horizon, perhaps we can glimpse what Schopenhauer, in a rare moment of poeticism, called the peace that is higher than all reason.